start this morning by reading part of a commentary written by a man named Tom Eric, found in Religion News Service and published January 17th, 2014. Eric is a writer, a church consultant, and an Episcopal priest based in New York. He's the author of Just Wondering Jesus and founder of the Church Wellness Project. He writes, after 36 years of serving churches as a pastor and a consultant, I came to a startling conclusion the other day. Not startling to you, perhaps. I might be the last person to get the memo, but this conclusion drew me up short. My conclusion, religion shouldn't be this hard. Now, as an aside, this commentary is filled with the word should. I understand the word should to be a violent word in the English language according to the Center for Nonviolent Communication. This is a group that helps people try not to be violent in their use of language. They say that should only induces guilt. I should have. Well, if I'd known better, I would have. So I'm just guilty about it. You should have. Well, if you'd known different, you would have done it differently. So guilt, should does nothing but put guilt on somebody. So I've changed all the shoulds. And let me tell you, he used a lot of shoulds in here. Eric goes on to say, an assembly that exists to help people must not be so willing to hurt people by declaring them worthless, unacceptable, undesirable, or strangers at the gate. An assembly that's intended to relax into the serenity of God's unconditional love must not be so filled with hatred and fear. An assembly that is called to do what Jesus did must not be so inwardly focused, so determined to be right, so eager for comfort, so fearful of failing. An assembly that follows an itinerant rabbi needs to not be chasing permanence, stability, and property. An assembly whose call is to oneness and to serving the least needs to not be perpetrating hierarchies of power and systems of preference. Faith is difficult, yes, because it inevitably entails self-sacrifice and renewal. Life, too, is difficult. Dealing with mammon is difficult. Speaking truth to power is difficult. Confronting our own weakness and capacity for sin is difficult. The institution whose sole justifiable purpose is to help us deal with those difficulties needs to not be making matters worse. When we bring our burdens to church, we must not find ourselves feeling intimidated by the in-crowds, caught up in conflicts about who's running things, budget anxieties, jousting over opinion or doctrine, or relentless demonizing of whoever is trying to lead. These are Tom Eric's words, and let me tell you, I don't find that in this church at all. Maybe my eyes are blind and I'm naive, but I haven't seen any of this in this church. I want to say that. Those aren't my words. He goes on to say, yes, I understand that church is a human institution, and therefore it will participate in humanity's brokenness. But church needs to be seeking to redeem that humanity, to heal that brokenness, to show better ways to live. Instead, many celebrate their own cruelty and bigotry and fight against the very transformation that God seeks. And it doesn't have to be this way. God certainly doesn't want it this way. Eric says, church must be a safe place, safe to be oneself, safe to make one's confession, safe to imagine more, safe to fail. Instead, church is often a dangerous place where people feel guarded, self-protected, hemmed in by tradition and expectation, required to obey rules. I'll take another aside here. When I was first became a clergy person, I went to a meeting held by the bishop for clergy women only. evidently this is in the book of discipline somewhere, that the bishop's supposed to meet with the clergywomen. And I mentioned that I had heard from several clergywomen, as a new clergy person, that they were afraid to talk to their peers, their colleagues, for fear that that person might be their district superintendent in the future or have some sort of power over them, so they were afraid to share and be who they really were. And I was just curious what other women had to say about that. And the 3 or 4 women that stood up all said, "Oh, I don't experience that at all. I have lots of friends that are clergy and we talk freely." Well, these were all women that had been in ministry for 20 or more years. And I'm not sure they fully heard or understand what I was talking about, because I'm still hearing it today, that clergy folks are afraid to talk to their clergy peers, at least in the United Methodist Church, because of that district superintendent's power over. So clergy, not just laity, gets stuck in these self-protective ways. Eric goes on to say, church must be different from society. Instead, it often plays by the same rules. Get mine, be first, be right, punish the weak, exclude the different, reward the wealthy. Sounds a little bit like some of your Sunday school lesson this morning. Our society needs healthy faith communities, but neither society nor God has much need for religious institutions grounded in right opinion, self-serving, and systemic danger. Now remember, this was written by a church consultant, a man who's worked with many, many churches, and he's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of churches. People who come to church come from very different places. Our understanding of God comes out of our differing life experiences. This is one of the things I'm learning that is okay in the Swedenborg Church. Something that I really like is that each one of you might have a different understanding of your faith, how your life experience helps you understand God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit. And I have not seen that in a lot of other churches, so I feel good, I feel right here when I come. John Pavlovich, in his book, If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk, tells about his friend Susan, who in 2016, if you think back what was happening in 2016, she was concerned about the division in the nation and in the church. She decided to start having women come over to her house to play bridge and to have lunch. And it was intentionally women who thought differently than she did. Her intent was not to change or fix or convert her guests. It was to hear their stories, to build a genuine relationship with these women that thought differently, and learn about how these women, I've left out a word, to learn about these women in ways that she couldn't from a distance, from the safety of distance, or from the safety of an echo chamber. She wanted to talk to them face to face. One day in her home, a woman with tears in her eyes said, "I just don't know why God made other races. If God hadn't made other races, then there wouldn't be racism and we'd all get along." I see heads shaking. This woman was genuinely grieving the fracture she could see from where she was. She was deeply troubled by the visible divisions, but she was viewing them through lenses that distorted the whys. Why this happened, the whys of their existence. She wasn't a bad person. She was a good person with a bad story. Somewhere along the line, she was told that her whiteness was the norm, the base-setting pigmentation of humanity, and that anything outside of that constituted other races and was somehow less than. Perhaps we all know people like Susan's lunch guest, really good people with some really bad God stories. These stories make racism, homophobia, nationalism, and misogyny logical byproducts. Many people came out of Christianity with a bad story, or people bear the scars of a bad story Christian with a tragically undersized God. This will cause the churches these people fill or oversee to resist changes that bring any movement toward balance in a world for thousands of years has been decidedly tipped in their favor. For thousands of years, it's been tipped in their favors. This is one of the things that I'm seeing in my denomination right now with the disaffiliations, is that people have bad God stories. And they've learned it from when they were little kids, and they don't know how to hear differently, and they're working to protect God and protect the Bible. They're not bad people. They're good people with bad God stories. This default religious worldview renders people unable to see clearly, because doing so would challenge and possibly completely upend their entire God story. The best way to love our neighbor is to begin with a posture of curiosity and to commit to learning something about them that we don't know yet. For myself, when I was a student at Kansas Wesleyan University back in the early 90s, I remember reading a book titled Doubting Thomas. I don't think I've shared this story here yet. If I have, it's always good to tell a story again. Joyce is shaking her head no. I read Doubting Thomas. Thomas was a seminarian assigned to work with a female chaplain on a Christian college campus as his field education experience. He wasn't so sure about women being called into ministry, so this was a difficult placement for him to start with. After a few weeks in this position, he asked to come in to talk to his supervisor, the woman clergy, and he shared some of his concerns with the sermons, because the sermons weren't quite, they just didn't quite sound right to him. He shared also his concern with her being woman clergy. She listened, and then she invited him to talk to others on the campus, to talk to the man who taught Christian history, the person teaching preaching, the theology professor, the pastor of the nearby church, and many others. And Thomas heard things about his Christian faith that he'd never learned before. He'd never heard it before in the Orthodox Christian church that he'd attended up until seminary. He started questioning what he had learned before, and he started thinking on his own. Reading this book as an undergraduate student, it sent me out into the world around me. I met with a number of people asking them questions like, who is God to you? Do you have an image of God in your mind? Who is Jesus? What has he got to do with your life? How do you understand the presence of the Holy Spirit? And what does it mean to you to say that the Bible is authoritative? Now, I went out and talked with good Christian folks. There were pastors in United Methodist churches, one Presbyterian pastor, these were all in Salina, the hospital chaplain, a Christian education director, a layman who was teaching adult Sunday school, one clergywoman, just to make it even, one man and one woman that were both laity. One man that I talked to did not find the resurrection important to his faith. And this was a pastor. He said just the fact that Jesus was willing to go to the cross gave substance to his faith. And the laywoman I talked to said the resurrection was the most important thing about her faith. Not just the death, but also the resurrection. Without the resurrection, her faith meant nothing. The hospital chaplain had a near-death experience when he was a teenager trying to save his brother from drowning in the lake. And with that near-death experience, his belief about God, Jesus, the Bible had little importance compared to the relationships that he experienced under the water that day. God saved him, and that was the key to his faith. every one of them was a good Christian person. They all came from their own life experience. And it was fascinating for me. I think it was helpful that I wasn't raised in the church and I could hear all these stories and accept them and say, yeah, that's exciting. That's cool. I'm glad to hear you share what's going on in your life. Val Webb has written a book titled In Defense of Doubt, An Invitation to Adventure. Webb writes, in dealing with people, Jesus did not condemn those who questioned or doubted. And I will add, those who thought differently from him. While Jesus was harsh with the scribes and the Pharisees, who claimed to have all the answers in watertight containers, he was always ready to encourage the genuine doubter. And many of them were women, whose place in society did not permit them to challenge the male teachers of the day. And yet Jesus allowed them to ask questions and to air their doubts. Martha had no qualms about challenging Jesus when he arrived after her brother Lazarus had died. The Greek woman who asked Jesus to cast out the evil spirit from her daughter would not be deterred by Jesus' response that his message was to the house of Israel. In fact, Jesus seemed to enjoy their challenges, calling it evidence of great faith. Thomas's request to see Jesus' wounded flesh before he would believe was treated with respect and not with condemnation. While Jesus marveled at those who believed without such evidence, he did not in any way denigrate Thomas's need for verification. Again, I say we all come to the Christian faith in different ways. We all come to it and we all live in it in differing ways, with differing personal experiences. Jesus loved people and listened to them. He heard their stories. He asked to hear their stories. He asked, what do you want me to do for you? I came to the faith as an adult. I came with family secrets. I was the adult daughter of an alcoholic, where you don't ask, you don't talk, you don't feel. I'm a sexual abuse survivor by a family member, and I carried those secrets, those awful secrets that I couldn't tell anyone, for 31 years. And then I was in a pastor's office praying the salvation prayer at his recommendation, not his insistence, but his recommendation. And after I finished, I told him, I think Jesus slipped in the back door while I wasn't looking, instead of coming in the front door when I invited him in. Knowing the harm family secrets can cause in someone's life, in my life, I do all that I can to help others from having to live a life of lies or secrets. Those abused in any fashion, those trapped in alcoholism, those secreted away in closets. I choose to no longer stand silently by, knowing there are those hurting in my midst. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes people don't say. Oftentimes I can see it in people's eyes. The first time I shared this publicly was probably 1992 or 93, and I went up to Clay Center to speak to a group of 200 women. And about 10% of them came up to me afterwards to speak to me, and many of them said, I know what you're talking about. And one woman who was probably at least my age now, I would have been in my late 40s, she was in her early mid-70s, she whispered in my ear, I'm like you, Billy, and I never told anyone. And I'm thinking what it would mean to live that long without sharing secrets. I was humbled recently when a woman told me that if she had known one pastor who thought like me when she was growing up, her life might have been very different when she couldn't reconcile her faith with her sexuality. She told me that she believes that I'm saving lives by speaking up and speaking out. And what more could a pastor want to do, literally, than to save lives? Mahatma Gandhi said, Jesus is ideal and wonderful, but you Christians, you're not like him. The author of 1 John says, The person who refuses to love doesn't know the first thing about God, because God is love. So you can't know God if you don't love. Love is the basis for living. There's nothing else, nothing more. And I say this, I hope it comes across with great humility. When I die, I want people to say to my daughter and to my 3 granddaughters, your Christian mom, your clergy grandmother worked hard to live a life like Jesus. May we all live more like Christ in the days and the weeks and the years to come. It's what we're called to do. And church really isn't that hard. It really isn't that